Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a friend who has been someone I've been sort of following on social media for quite some time. I'm a huge fan of his work. His name is Stephen Volk. Thank you for joining me, Stephen.
Pleasure. Really good to talk to you.
So I can't wait to get into your career, because I've sort of followed you a little bit from afar when we were first friends on, I think it was Facebook that we first sort of met up. But you wrote one of my favorite films, Ken Russell's Gothic. Sorry, Ken Russell's The Gothic. No, I'm just ruined it. Ken Russell's Gothic, which is the story about the origin of Frankenstein.
Yeah, and it was my first produced screenplay. And it was a bit of a baptism of fire, or it was a little like kind of firewalking.
I can imagine it. I mean, the whole idea of you're writing something about creation, and then you're dealing with the devils.
Who the director was going to be. I mean, I was working in advertising at the time. I was a copywriter at Ogilvy, Benson and Mather, and I was spending my evenings burning the midnight oil, working on screenplays, and this was kind of one of them. And it was kind of born out of reading the book, I'm sure you know, Heritage of Horror, written by David Peary, who has since become a great friend of mine. But I didn't know him at the time. And as I'm sure you remember, one of the first chapters in his thesis, in a way, which was a kind of rehabilitation of Hammer as part of the Gothic tradition of English literature. Noble tradition, according to Peary and according to me, was all about this kind of summer of gloom on the shores of Lake Geneva, where these famous poets got together, romantic figures of the Romantic movement. And in this gloomy summer, kind of stuck, rather kind of in lockdown, so to speak, because of the exploding volcanic eruption that darkened the skies, these famous poets kind of decided to have a ghost story session. And it weirdly, and this was obviously the catalyst, as amazingly, it gave birth to the two abiding myths of horror for the last 200 years, which is the vampire, by way of the vampires written by Polidori, Byron's Doctor, and Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley. So it, with a little conceit, I kind of made the catalyst happen on one night, this night when they were all dreaming up ghost stories. That's the way I dramatized it, really. And I couldn't believe when I read David Peary's book about these incredibly volatile characters all thrown together one stormy night. I thought, this has got to be a film or a play or a story anyway. I couldn't believe nobody's done it before. So I kind of launched into it.
Oh, it's such a great story, such a great situation. And I worked on Shelley for my PhD. I was doing Percy Bysshe Shelley and laughter. And so obviously I kind of read everything by Mary Shelley as well, and the whole history. The Richard Holmes biography was the big one at the time. Oh, it was such a good read.
There's certain bits, if you read the biographies at the time of Byron and Shelley, there's certain passages leap out at you and diaries. There's certain bits just jump out at you as being so modern, and so sarcastic and so just I don't know. It was very it excited me a lot getting to kind of know those characters. But of course, I didn't. As people kind of berated me, that it wasn't their Byron or it wasn't their Shelley. Well, everyone's got a different idea of who those characters were. Nobody's going to have a definitive idea, are they? Even if they're writing so-called non-fiction. But in any case, my drama wasn't really supposed to be a definitive version of those characters. It was only a sliver of those characters in as far as they were appropriate to the drama I was telling. And I would have thought it's pretty obvious that the drama I was telling was about the birth of horror, was itself a horror story. So the characters that were in it were going to be archetypal figures of horror, of Gothic horror. So it wasn't a kind of rounded three-dimensional Byron. It was a Byron that was like Dracula, and it wasn't a Shelley in 3 dimensions. It was a Shelley that was a little bit like Frankenstein, and Polidori was kind of a mad monk, and Mary was the kind of virgin, if you like, and then there was the fatal woman, Claire, who. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make them all kind of a conglomeration of like I say, archetypes, symbolic characters, to and wind them up and see what happens.
I love the fact that during this sort of writing competition, the professional writers, so to speak, although Shelley sold so few poems that he could never have supported himself if he hadn't been rich, but the ones who were later would gain real fame as writers, or saw themselves at the time as writers, utterly failed. And it was like the dentist and Mary Shelley, who didn't particularly see themselves at that time as writers. Those were the guys who actually
it's incredible, isn't it? That's yes. And you sense almost that they were the most put down of the characters in that chemistry of elements. I certainly think that Polidori was very much under the thumb and kind of being punched down at. That was my conception of it anyway. And Mary, I think, didn't see herself as on a literary level with the great men that surrounded her, kind of thing. And there is a kind of just an obvious irony about that. That's which whose work persists, really,
Oh, absolutely, totally, there was very much a sense of, I think even their little nicknames for each other were things like Dormouse, and it was all this very domestic sort of. I'm there to support him, my guy, but and then there was all this mixture of sort of love lives as well. That they were. As your script and the film sort of suggests, this is almost like a precursor to a 60s commune.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, all communes end up being self-destructive in a way, emotionally, don't they? With great ideals, and yet in the end, it's a kind of conflagration in a way. And there's a sort of a sense of that, I think, even in the 90 minutes of Gothic. There's a kind of really laugh out loud moment, which wasn't really intended on the page, where the next morning Gabriel Byrne says, "Oh, you'll get used to our nights of frivolity," And when I first saw the cut, I thought that's going to get a big laugh, because it's like, is every night going to be like this? You must be kidding.
I mean, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, how was it when you saw that cast? Because in some ways, I think that's kind of Julian Sands and Timothy Spall. It's kind of like perfect.
Yeah, well,
and Gabriel Byrne, I can't think of a better
Byron. A bit out there, because if you see photographs, paintings of Polidori, he's actually better looking than Byron. He's actually more Byronic looking than Byron. But when Ken cast the others, he wanted someone that was, well, as he put it, a bit uglier than the rest because he didn't want it to be full of just good-looking people. So poor old Tim got roped into it. But Tim, Tim, when I was with him at the Sorrento Film Festival, one of the people, one of the things he was asked by the audience, and he said, "Well, someone's got to get their head shaved in a Ken Russell film, and in this one, it was me." I remember sitting on the stairs outside when they were filming, and he said to me, I don't really know what this film is." He said, "I don't really, it's not sort of what you don't want an actor to say, in a way." And, since he's a kind of national treasure now, I think I can tell this story without too much opprobrium. He said, "I don't really know what this film is." And I said, "Well," I said, "just think of it as a Hammer film. Just think you're in a Hammer film." He said, "Oh, I get it now." And he went off quite happily.
It is funny though, because actors must sort of come. I mean, you've lived with the project because you've been writing it. Obviously, director will have been through the
Yeah.
whole process of pre-production, but an actor can just sort of helicopter in and it depends on what the process is. Have they had rehearsal? Have they had how some are just going
Yeah.
into
I
costume
think, to be
and
honest, from what I could see, and I used to go to the set for a bit, and then I found that's a bit of a spare part on the set, as writers always are.
Mm.
So I kind of started to stay away and get on with my next project. Looking back in that, I should have just bloody stayed there, because it was, it's not every day you get a film made, and it's not every day that the director allows you to come to the set every day. I should have just hung out, and just enjoyed it. But I was kind of nervous as well. I was under 30 at the time, and the first
Mm.
films that I've ever been on. But I'll never forget that thrill of going in and seeing all those actors in costume round the dinner table there, getting ready, to shoot that dinner scene. And I literally thought the last time I saw this, it was in my head. And that is
That's
that is really why I've been writing films for the last 40 odd years, because things get to
mm.
move from inside your head to be existing in the world, and then you bid them goodbye and they become what they become. And some people like them, some people hate them, and so on and so forth. But basically, it's yeah, it's as John Carpenter, I think, said about horror. Horror is making internal things external, but you could say that about cinema in a way as well. I've always been completely intoxicated by what's on the big screen, as have you, John. As I can tell by the way you talk about the films you love, and we can get onto that, because I know we share a lot of our favorite films. We share,
absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, actually being there when it's all kind of happening in front of your eyes is there's a kind of banality about the practicality of the process of filming. I mean, Ken, for instance, more or less, I think, methodically directed, more or less like other directors I've seen. In other words, he would get together to do a scene with the actors. The actors would walk through the scene and demonstrate it. Ken would watch it with his DP. Then the actors would go away, the scene would be lit, and then, so the methodology of what the AD does in terms of organizing the set, what the DP does in terms of setting the lights and the look of it and everything, that's pretty much like every set I've been on. But of course, different personalities bring different sensibility to it. The curious thing about it, I think, the most curious thing in my experience on Gothic was that Ken didn't really rewrite the script very much. He kind of,
Mm.
first of all, he was very complimentary about it and wanted to make it really quickly, which I realized looking back at it was quite remarkable. He was like, let's make this in the spring. And it was sort of October, I don't know, whatever, when we were discussing it. So there wasn't this long kind of hiatus where we had endless development hell and we discussed this, that, and the other. It was like, no, I want to do it. That's what happens, I think, when you get an A-list director, or a name director, even just saying, I want to do this. Everyone shuts up, which is great, and lets them get on with it.
Mm.
I mean, his only change in the script was I had a prologue and epilogue, which was Mary Shelley as an older woman on her deathbed. And the thing was that the idea was she was telling us slightly in voiceover at the beginning what happened in 1816, and then it goes back to her on her deathbed as she kind of comes to peace with this thing she's created. Uh, and Ken wanted to get rid of that because I think essentially he wanted the film to be Ken Russell's fantasy rather than Mary Shelley's fantasy. I liked the idea
Mm.
that as it was subjective and she was drifting off into death, it was a mixture of feelings and hallucinations and strangeness that you could believe in her mind. But by stripping away the prologue and epilogue, it became about the director's viewpoint of what was going on that night. But having said that, I think he would just have kind of mad scenes that he wanted to put in, like the belly dancer. I had the mechanical piano player because that was contemporaneous to what was literally up the road. There was a guy making automata, kind of desktop automata, if you like. But it wasn't a huge leap to think he might have made life-size ones. And it wasn't a huge leap in my mind to make him think that Byron would have bought one of these life-sized ones. It wasn't impossible. But then Ken came in and said, well, if you can have an automaton playing the piano, we can have one being a belly dancer, and so on and so forth. So he would throw in extra scenes like that, and actually the visualization of the Fuseli painting was more or less a kind of improvised scene. With my subtlety hat on, thought that the presence of the painting would be enough of a reference for the to kind of bed down the film in that world of the nightmare that's so vivid. The painting that was apparently on the wall of Sigmund Freud's study, allegedly. I don't know. But Ken thought, no, that's a typical Ken thought, which is it's not enough just to have the painting in the background. We got to make the painting come to life, which yeah,
Subtext is
yes,
for
exactly.
cowards.
Yeah. Subtlety. Yeah, he would always say things like, Goya wasn't subtle, and Picasso's not subtle. He would occasionally say things like, he didn't sound bitter about it, but he would say things like, about the British establishment. Oh, that lot hate me, meaning David Putnam and Goldcrest, and the kind of respectable side of British cinema. But he didn't come across as bitter about that. He was just kind of factual about it, which of course that took him to America and doing films like Altered States and whatnot.
Yeah, which is another horror film, and a great one. I feel it's certainly got its. I mean, I love him. I love Borman. I love Rogue. I love that tradition of British nuttiness, and and I think it's something that. I was just reading your anthology of pieces on cinema, and and you make exactly this point that the social realists Mike Leigh and Ken Loach are in many ways as formulaic as any other genre. I think you say Ken Loach is as much as formulaic as Star Wars, and I totally agree with you. I mean, my bed bug, my particular sort of peeve when it comes to world cinema is the Dardenne brothers. I just find them, drab and unwatchable and patronizing, and I don't know why. And people
I'll be honest,
love them.
In my wildest dreams, and it didn't sadly come to pass. I thought, when Gothic came out in 1987, I really hoped that it was the beginning of a kind of English rebirth of fantastique, as the French would have it. There was Hellraiser, Dream Demon, Company of Wolves around that time. Just a little flourish of films that were unashamedly, well, I would say imaginative, whether you like them or not, you think they're crap or not crap. I mean, at least they put it out there, and they were kind of, how can I say? Well, not Mike Leigh and not, not the social realism of.
Yeah, or not period
Yeah,
adaptations of E.M. Forster, for that matter, as much as Merchant Ivory can be interestingly
yeah,
subversive
absolutely.
in
I
their
agree.
own
I agree.
way.
Yeah. I mean, some of the films, I agree, like Morris or Remains of the Day are absolutely superb films, and their surface solemnity in a way, or respectfulness, belies the kind of, I think, the anarchy that's underneath them a lot of the time.
Mm.
But it was the British respect of Merchant Ivory, or the illusion of what Merchant Ivory stood for, that I think they were kind of expecting, but also kind of preparing themselves to be outraged by what Ken would do with the Romantic poets. It's kind of like they knew already, but they were on, that they weren't going to like it. It's kind of like it just,
Just the names
yeah,
put together.
exactly, exactly. Um, yeah. So we were also onto a bit of a clash, because I think it was too kind of highbrow for horror fans, and it was too much of a horror film for literary fans. And I kind of thought in my stupidity that there would be a kind of Venn diagram where the two circles overlap completely and we're great. But in fact, it was a Venn diagram where the circles were completely separate, if you see what I mean.
I do think there are some occasions when I'm a fan of all genre. I mean, I love science fiction. I mean, this is where I
Yeah,
started reading, was science
yeah,
fiction and
yeah.
horror and fantasy. And then I didn't read my first sort of non for school realist book until I was
Mm.
sort of in my 15, 16-year old. And I think I started on things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and, going straight into the beats. So, not particularly realistic for that. And the thing that I noticed when I was sort of at university was one of the things that I didn't that was always very hit or miss was when somebody tried to so-called slum it in a genre, some
Love
sort
it.
of
Yeah,
literary,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? There's some sort of someone would go, Paul Theroux or someone would go, I'm thinking of writing a science fiction novel. I'll show you
Oh,
chaps
well,
how
the
it's
classic
done.
thing would
And you would
be
just be,
someone like Ian McEwan, who would write a science fiction book but refuse to call it science fiction. That was my real bugbear. That would really get on my nerves. At least admit what it is, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. I often think that something like I struggled with The
Mm,
Shining for a long time, the film version of The
mm.
Shining. I think it's great and everything, but I kind of there is a bit of me that does sort of think that Stanley Kubrick doesn't quite understand horror and that he is making a great film, but I'm just not entirely
Yeah,
sure it's a
yeah.
horror film.
And
And I don't mean that in the
I'm
sense
not
of it's
entirely sure that
elevated
he
horror.
knew why which bits, or why certain bits worked and why other bits didn't, kind of thing, or
Mm,
why certain bits were
mm.
disturbing and why certain bits weren't disturbing. Uh, and why? I mean, but then again, uh, you can. How can I put this? Yeah, you can worry an awful lot about whether something's funny or disturbing when in fact it can be both. Um,
Right, right.
and
Yeah.
that over the top performance of Jack Nicholson sometimes puts people completely off. And I think that's why possibly you and possibly I didn't immediately think this is a great masterpiece of horror that I wanted it to be, because the over the topness of almost pantomime quality of Jack Nicholson made it absurd. But I think with the passing of time, I've started to think, what absurd? What's wrong with absurd? What's wrong with absurd?
Yeah, right.
And growing up with David Lynch and whatnot, you start to think, what absurdity and horror and strangeness and nightmares are often a mixture of kind of the disturbing and the ludicrous, aren't they? And
Yeah,
did Kubrick
yeah.
kind of know that, or did he stumble upon that by accident, or you know, when people say watch Gothic,
Yeah,
for instance, some
yeah.
people don't know whether it's a comedy. I remember when we had our very first screening at the BFI, before it was released, somebody stood up and asked, I think they asked me rather than Ken, did you intend it to be a comedy? Uh, and Ken, being a bit wiser than me, leant over to the microphone and said, "Yes." Just get out of the way. But I don't know. In my kind of senile years now, I I'm not bothered about whether something's funny or not. It's kind of like, if something turns out to be both amusing and disturbing, or neither. I don't know. I don't set out for some I don't actually like comedy horror. That's the funny thing. But I don't mind. I
Oh,
don't really
really?
like. I enjoy, say, Theatre of Blood. I enjoy, Dr. Phibes
Mm,
and those kind of things. I can't. But what I mean is, sorry, not that I don't enjoy them. I do enjoy them. I love Inside Number Nine and those kind of TV shows that mix it. But I
mm.
I can't do it. I can't set out to do a comedy horror somehow. Um,
That's interesting. I was talking to the horror director Rob
oh
Savage, who
yes, yes.
made
Host. Yeah.
Host, and we had a long conversation one day. I was showing him around Venice, and he said he's sort of like, I'm going to publish this, but I'm not sure if it was a secret. Well, anyway, I'm publishing it. He really didn't like American
Oh
Werewolf in
yeah.
London. He said, I don't think it's funny, and I don't think it's scary. And
Headline,
I was
headline.
like, wow. Yeah, I was like, wow, really? And it was like, yeah, I just never got on with it. And it's got this huge reputation, and I know it has. And I was kind of thinking, yeah, that's kind of true of a lot of Landis movies. Because, like, Blues Brothers, I don't think the music's that good. And I don't think it's that funny either. It just seems to be lots of cars crashing into each other. It's sort of like, it's got this weird American maximalism about
Yeah,
him that
yeah.
doesn't hit me in the right place. There's something weirdly
Maybe it's to
aggressive
do
about
with
it that
I don't I don't want to feel I'm going to see a horror film and going to have too much fun. I think that's what it is. People often say,
Mm.
"Oh, I didn't feel that was very enjoyable," and I'll say, maybe I've said to you on Facebook, I don't know. I say, "What's enjoyable got to do with going to the cinema?" Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
kind of just my
yeah.
taste, and I feel that okay, you go and see something enjoyable. I love I laugh as much as anyone, but I wouldn't kind of put myself out to go and see something that's going to make me laugh. It's kind of an easy bar to reach. Maybe that's what it is, but it takes a lot more to kind of disturb
Mm.
me. And you know, Lanthimos
Well,
is a Ken Russell kind of character, I think, for today. Would you say? I'm quite a big fan of his, although I wasn't a fan of the favorite because I find kind of funny royal families really obnoxious. But that's just my personal feeling. But all these other things I've seen, I
mm.
found really, really, really good and just interesting. But again, he's another one that kind of uh, I think he doesn't. I get the sense he doesn't bother himself by the distinction of whether something's funny or not funny. It's just either interesting or it's not
No,
interesting. You know what I mean?
I think it's a little bit like Lars
Yeah,
von
yeah,
Trier. I remember there's a sort of behind the scenes of Dogville, and they're shooting a really nasty scene. And this is similar to Blue Velvet as well. I think that during the scene with Dennis Hopper and Isabella Rossellini at some point has to say, "Guys, stop laughing. This isn't funny. It's we're doing something. You got to be a
yeah.
bit more sensitive to what we're doing." And similarly with Lars von Trier and Dogville. And this actually reminded me of a piece you wrote in the book that I was reading earlier. You mentioned Blue Velvet and how initially they were going to have helium in the gas tank that Dennis Hopper was inhaling during these scenes, and it would give him a sort of Donald Duck voice. And you said this would be great. This would be actually quite good. And it immediately made me think of there's an Italian giallo called The New York Ripper, where the killer actually does have a Donald Duck, keeps phoning victims up and going, and it's just like this absolutely weird sort of, and Donald Duck is massive in Italy. I mean, Donald
Yeah,
Duck
yeah,
comics are read well into adulthood. Um, and so it's this huge figure. And so the idea of having this really violent film, and because New York Ripper is one of the
yeah.
infamous giallos of sort of how far towards sadism are you willing to
Was it
go
one of the video nasties
in
by any
these.
chance? Do you think?
I think it was, yeah, I think it was because it obviously passed over into, because it's although it's an Italian director and Italian talent behind the camera, I think it's trying to pass itself over very much as an American film. A little bit like Cannibal Holocaust did as well. That it's but it's the same thing of that, the ridiculous and the absurd. It's like, you're not even killing me seriously. You're killing me, and you're not even taking it seriously.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I do you think I think sometimes when you get notes on scripts, I think we were talking about this earlier on. It's all about someone saying, "Oh, that's not very plausible. Let's make it a bit more plausible. Let's make it a bit more real." Or that doesn't really make sense. Let's make it make a bit more sense. Or oh, that doesn't conform to what I was expecting. So let's make it more what I was expecting. And it just flattens everything. Everything's flattened. Everything seems the same. Everything looks the same because everything's shot the same, and there's no spikes of interest or even hairpin turns to plots or anything. It's all been micromanaged and overthought. So the thought of something as stupid as, imagine you're watching a three or four part ITV cop show and the killer talks like Donald Duck. It would never happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's surely a reason to say, why not? Oh, because people would find it funny. Well, so, yeah, but if they find it funny, they might switch off. Yeah, but they might not. And so on and so forth. But you never
the people who don't switch off will remember it for the. I find this true of like color grading. It's just like, why do we color grade everything so it's all consistent? Why don't we, I kind of like the fact that in Jaws, the sky changes color, from one shot to the next. I kind of, because that's what happens in the real world as well. Light changes, it doesn't have to be always the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I think it is a kind of micromanaging view of risk taking or non-risk taking, actually. And what you talked about, the era of going full circle back to the era of Ken Russell, John Borman, and Nick Rogue in the, let's say, the 70s, but obviously beyond that in both directions, is that, directors that had a vision about what they were about, I think. They took the subject matter from various sources. They didn't always generate their own subject matter, but they had a uniqueness about going about their task, which I think was, in a way to do with just leave me alone, or have people, have people around you that just say back off, And I suppose Polanski would fit into that. Maybe he's a name that is difficult to mention now, but I'm thinking of certain films like The Tenant and Repulsion, obviously, and Macbeth and Rosemary's Baby. Well, that whole half dozen films.
Fearless vampire killers.
They felt, well, I suppose a well-worn path, this argument, but they felt like authored films, didn't they?
No, certainly. It just reminds me, there must have been a Chinese cook at some point in the history of the world with some.
Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
One saying to him, sweet and sour? I mean, choose
people
one. We can't have them
won't
both.
like sweet and sour. Can't we just have it sour?
Yeah, they want sweet or sour.
That's brilliant.
Let me ask you about something else. I haven't had my appendix out, so I don't have an appendix scar, but I do have a couple of scars. One is Threads, and the other is GhostWatch.
A psychic scar.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. Threads is
I hope it's
obvious.
not a physical scar, but although I did hear the other night when we had a screening up in Nottingham that the guy that was one of our hosts said he saw it when he was 12 years old in a house full of his mates, and he said at one point, and he told me what the point was, I can't remember it now. He said I was physically sick all over the carpet.
Oh my
It's a
God.
quite a you know on my part quite an embarrassing but proud moment as a horror writer to make someone physically sick.
Well, I think I mean, for listeners who haven't seen GhostWatch, first of all, see GhostWatch because it's a brilliant piece of television. It's really inventive. Um, but it really worked for me because I was watching it when it first was broadcast, and it was using presenters who, instead of actors playing presenters, it was using the actual presenters. So you had Sarah Green and Mike Smith, who anyone who was growing up in that era knew from the Multicolored Swap Shop, and was it Blue Peter Sarah
Yeah,
Green was in
yeah.
originally, and Michael Parkinson, who, of course, was this talk show host and sort of distinguished television personality, and Craig Charles, who was sort of like the up and coming young sort
Comic,
of
yeah.
Liverpool poet at the time,
Yeah,
wasn't he?
yeah.
Was like I remember him as a sort of John Hegley figure. Um, and yet you devised this kind of what would be called now a lot sort of mockumentary, but it's sort of like a mock live
Yeah.
broadcast. So it works even more, I mean, I just thought that was a great idea. And it was only today when I was researching that I found out that this was meant to be a series
Well, it
initially.
started as my initial pitch was for a series. This will kind of age. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, John. Series called Edge of Darkness with Bob Peck. Do you remember?
Oh,
But it's
yeah,
around
yeah.
that time that my age.
Wonderful. Martin
Yeah, yeah,
Campbell
yeah.
directed.
It was a solid kind of gloomy, dark thriller series, about three or four parts, I think. And my agent said to me, "Oh, I think the BBC might be receptive to your kind of maybe supernatural drama along those lines, since that was a big success." So I went in and talked to a producer called Ruth Baumgarten, who I can't remember if I knew her before that or whether I specifically went in to talk about this. Anyway, the upshot was I pitched this and worked on a kind of 5 hour series, which was a conventional drama series about a psychical investigator, if you like, who gets in cahoots with a film crew, a bit like Roger Cook, foot in the door journalism, like World
Mm,
in Action, who are covering a haunted house. So the scientist is, and the film crew, and the film and the TV. So it was a drama, though. Various threads came together in it. We couldn't get it off the ground, but the BBC, Ruth found out that there was a slot going for a 90-minute screen one that hadn't been filled. And she said, "Oh, can we do your story as a 90-minute screen one?" And I said, "Well, it's 5 hours of plot, so I don't think so." But I said, "What about the last episode? That was always going to be a live broadcast from a haunted house." So I said, "Why don't we do it? Why don't we do the 90 minutes as a live broadcast from a haunted house? And what if we made it as if it did feel like a live broadcast from a haunted house?" And that's how it all started, really. I wasn't sure we could pull it off or even get it made or how to write it. I didn't know how to write something that, because it couldn't declare itself as a piece of drama. I had to kind of fake it as a piece of outside broadcast, and so I had to kind of learn
yeah.
how to sort of write interviews and things. But I had to do the reverse of what you normally do in a screenplay, which is leave out the exposition. And you have to say, "So what happened to you?" And then the person says, "Well, I was living in this house." So all the exposition is on the page. People just say it. It's the complete opposite. So
That's amazing. Yeah.
but
I
then,
love
yeah,
it.
but
I
then, yeah,
love
all
that
the things you could
format.
do, like satellite link up to an expert that's in New York, except he wasn't in New York. He was just over the other side of the studio, obviously. So we did all those and the telephones, people telephoning in, and it became a different vocabulary for telling a ghost story. That's what it was exciting to me, is that it could only be told for television. This was a I grew up loving the ghost stories for Christmas and all the rest of it as much as anyone else, but this would be a ghost story that you could only do on TV. You couldn't do a book version of it. You couldn't tell it as a story or even on the radio. This is a television ghost story in the kind of purest form. That's what I was trying to do, really.
Well, in a way, it reminds me of going back to something like Dracula and how Dracula was written as a sort of a
Yeah,
diary and then a series of
yeah.
letters and then,
All
a
the classic,
collage of
Gothic
newspapers.
style. What's the word? Epistolatory. In order to, well, it's found footage, isn't it? It's kind of giving a
Precisely, yeah.
verisimilitude to something that otherwise you would dismiss. Therefore, it's got to be, you'll never guess what happened to me, but it really did happen to me, kind of, blah, blah, blah. So this was the TV version of that exact thing.
Yeah. It's like Marshall McLuhan says, the medium is the message. You make the medium into the horror, they make the lines of communication into the actual, central to the story.
The bit that
I
I was most, and when I wrote it, I thought if I could just get that moment to work, this whole thing will be worthwhile. Is when we show something to the audience at home, and then the presenter says, "I didn't see anything, did you?" But I know that we've actually shown it to the audience at home. I thought if I could please just get away with that moment where you show a ghost on the screen and then the person who's the authority in charge of the whole thing says, "No, I didn't see anything." And I just imagine people at home saying, "Hang on, there was something."
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I thought a really effective moment in it as well was because famously Sarah Green and Mike Smith were a real couple, and when something happens, I think it's Sarah Green is actually, and Mike Smith starts saying, "Get her out of there, get her out." And so it's like his professionionalism
I love that
suddenly
idea
drops because,
and that came out at quite a late stage that he wanted to be in it because she was in it. But I thought when Ruth told me that he wanted to be in it, I thought immediately that would be really good because you've got the kids there, you've got the kind of surrogate parent who is the scientist, and then you've got the whole kind of family of the TV crew surrounding these kids, and of course our own association with the TV family and TV personalities. So it's all about, there's that relationship that we have, which is completely manufactured in our heads, that we have some kind of relationship with TV characters. So that added another level to it for me.
have you ever thought of doing a follow-up in a Big Brother house?
Well, Charlie Brooker did that with the zombies, didn't he? That's that.
That's right. Yeah, it's been I really hate Charlie Brooker and Black Mirror because he's sort of like he's like the black hole that just sucks up all your good ideas. Every good idea that you think, oh, wouldn't it be good if? Oh no, Black Mirror did that on episode 4. There's very rarely a good idea that I have that somebody doesn't say, "Oh yeah, that's Black Mirror." That is.
Oh yeah, somebody's
bastard.
done it before. You just have to ignore
it. Yeah, do your own twist on it. Do your own twist on it. I loved reading an internet theory the other day that Blair Witch, the witch appears right at the very beginning because it's one of the women that is being interviewed at the beginning when the film crew's going around interviewing people, and there's one person who says, "Oh yeah, there was this story that she used to turn people to the wall and da 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 da," and it's like that's the witch.
Oh my god, internet theories disappear down that rabbit. Oh my god.
I love it. I love them. The hypertext.
We mentioned The Shining, didn't we? There was a whole documentary about the conspiracy theories and Easter egg.
What's it called? Room 2?
I don't remember the name of the room, but it was called that. You're right, but I can't remember the number of the room. That's terrible. I'm a terrible horror fan.
237. 237, maybe. That sounds like. Yeah. Now, at this point in the recording, everybody will hear a voice go 237 over what we're just saying, so that we to cover our blushes.
Someone coming in the background. Tap us on the shoulder.
Talking about, this relates to Gothic as well. I mean, a recent horror treatment of Mary Shelley was in The Bride. Did you get an opportunity to see
I haven't
Maggie
seen it yet, no,
Gyllenhaal's new
unfortunately.
film? Ah, right. Okay, because they have Mary Shelley is sort of is there as a ghost or a presence throughout the film, sort of intercut, like
Oh,
in black and
really?
white, and yeah, it's kind of it's an interestingly mad film. I won't spoil it or say
Mm,
anything more. Um, I think there's a lot to
mm.
chew on in it. I'm not entirely sure
Yeah,
it all
yeah.
works. Is my
Oh,
but
yeah.
then again, I'd kind of rather have
Mm.
that
Straightforward. Yeah, yeah,
than
yeah.
something that works and is boring.
Yeah, there's all
You know,
sorts of yeah, people won't suddenly stop making Frankenstein films, will they? There'll always be new ways to do them. I mean,
it's
yeah,
never going to
yeah,
happen. It's never going to happen. It's always going to have a new
yeah.
Frankenstein. Always going to have a new. I mean, I quite liked Guillermo del Toro when I saw it on the big screen. I thought that was
Mm,
its canvas. But like many Netflix films, I can't work out why you would necessarily watch
mm.
it on the small screen. You know, I mean, feels like a big screen movie, an
Yeah,
event
yeah.
movie. Um, and it was Frankenstein. I mean, it was the creature as Wolverine, essentially. You know, it was
Well, I
the
think I mean,
indestructible.
I did really enjoy it. I suppose in with the
Mm,
passing of time since I watched it when it came out, um, I guess I think to myself, and there's nothing to do with his vision of how to tell it. To what extent do we need that traditional telling of the story? We've seen a lot of almost traditional versions, like Frankenstein, the True Story, which I'm sure you know. The one with was it
mm.
James Mason? I can't remember, but um, and of course the Kenneth Branagh Frankenstein, which is again operatically and narratively, akin to the book in terms of the canvas that was you know, yeah. I often think, what on earth would I do if someone said, and nobody has over the years, damn them, asked me to do a version of it.
What would be the classic Gothic text you would choose if you got a chance to, we're going to make a $70 million movie of
Well, you see, I don't.
what would be the one that would
That's
be your
probably the question I would have is that why does it need to be 70 million? Because I'd kind of like
mm,
to have known, what would be the version of Frankenstein that would have been made by, say, Werner Herzog when he did Caspar Hauser, okay?
right.
Which had a kind of off the cuff, almost documentary feel to it, and yet was
Mm.
completely absorbing in terms of believable period detail, but not lavish, um, and yet terribly compelling in a kind of
I mean, even when he does
yeah.
Nosferatu, there's a
Oh,
lot in
I loved
Nosferatu
his
which is just him
Nosferatu. Yeah,
him wandering around
yeah,
the mountains and using mountains as a scary
yeah. I actually
places,
found I
which of
found
course they are.
Herzog Nosferatu quite disturbing as well because it was
Mm,
I think it was truly poetic. Actually, I think
mm.
there was nothing really superfluous, and there was nothing. I think one of the many things he does really well. I think he strips things away, so there's not kind of superfluous character gubbins and bollocks, and it's kind of everything's gone, everything's gone, and then but you can rest on things, and if something's an image, then he lets you take in the image for as long as necessary, kind of thing, really, and makes me want to watch it again now I'm talking about it. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah, me too.
yeah.
Me
Or the
too.
version, another
I
version
love
of
that idea
Frankenstein. I
of
was thinking, with these two versions that just came out, was what would Peter Watkins' Culloden kind of version of Frankenstein be? A kind of very black and white on the hoof documentary about Frankenstein be with a film crew
yeah,
following him, in the way that you remember
yeah,
that remember the
yeah.
camera kind of in the battle talking to people, various things like that. So there's a million other versions in an alternative, in many
Yeah.
alternative universes that could be done to Frankenstein. But there's loads of there's loads of other things that haven't been touched inexplicably, you know. I can't think of any now, actually. What?
I don't think Lovecraft has ever really. I mean, the only way you could say Lovecraft has been done is just because his
Yeah,
influence has been
yeah,
so
yeah,
prevalent. So why do Mountains of Madness when you've got
yeah,
The Thing? You know.
absolutely. What a great film that is.
Um.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, my God, that's one of my
It's the film I
favorites.
always hold
Definitely,
up
that's
when
my
people say, "Oh, why oh why do you want to do a remake of something?" And then I think, just remind them that John Carpenter's Thing was a remake, you know. And if
yeah.
you hadn't had that remake, we were very good to have the 1950s one, but even better to have the John Carpenter's one.
Yeah, and Cronenberg's
Yeah, yeah,
Fly, I would
yeah,
add
yeah,
to the pile, which is vastly
yeah, yeah,
superior
yeah,
to the
yeah.
Vincent Price film and brilliantly scripted. I love that. That film is so the dialogue in that film is so witty. I particularly like the actor who I forget his name now, but he's in Blood Simple as well by the Coen brothers, and he plays Gina Davis's sort of boss ex-lover. And he just goes round to her apartment one day. She finds him in the shower, and his
I don't remember
explanation
that
is,
at
"I
all.
was just nearby." Yeah, he's so good. He's such a good sort of because he's like a slimy. The idea is this sort of slimy guy compared to Jeff Goldblum, who's this, but then he turns it into the sort of hero who's saving her
I
as
wish I could
well,
remember who
and
that
gets
is.
his arm burned
I'll tell
off.
you one thing that just
Yeah.
occurred to me, again, coming full circle to other things that we talked about, is David Cronenberg in terms of, I'm thinking of the film Viggo Mortensen was in recently.
Oh, history of
No, no, the more
violence.
recent
Oh no, more
one called
recently,
Crimes of the
Crimes of the
Future. You know that
Future.
one where he's the artist?
Yeah.
I loved that. I absolutely
Yeah.
loved it. But also, I loved it because it had that quality that I was talking about, whereby he wasn't thinking, uh, would this be too funny? Would this be funny or is it creepy?
Mm.
Does it matter if it's creepy or funny? Like, you know, the organs and the.
Yeah, the guy with loads of
Yes, that's right.
ears for
That's
a
absolutely,
face.
yeah, that's absolutely what popped into my mind when we're talking, you know, and I thought, thank God for people going for things like that, that just, you know, just explore that kind of world, you know, and like I say, Lynch was the same, you know. I mean, the wonderful thing about Lynch, when you read
Yeah.
about him, of course, was that he was a great believer in goodness. You know, you know, he
Mm.
wasn't someone that reveled in the sadistic side of life or anything like that. He didn't want to, you know, to rest on torment as images and that kind of thing. You know, he was. Uh, I think the more you read about him, you realize he he was a kind of, in a way, a pure kind of creator in the sense that, you know, fueled with coffee and cigarettes. He was
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
zone
yeah,
into
yeah,
it.
exactly.
And the most brilliant thing about him, I think, was that he maybe again a kind of touchstone to Russell, I think, and the kind of filmmakers we're talking about. They trusted their instinct, the stuff that comes up from the subconscious or unconscious rather. So, you know, I think that sometimes the worst thing you can do as a writer is to have these ideas bubble up and you self-censor and they're gone. You know,
Mm.
and I tend to think if something bubbles up and you're kind of in the zone and something, you know, like the person with ears all over their face or whatever, it comes, I always kind of believe that it comes for a reason. It comes because some part of your brain is going over all this mulch that you're doing. And it springs up for some reason that is not part of your conscious kind of working out of a story or that kind of thing, but it's just kind of meant to be there. And usually they're things that I want to really grasp and hang on to.
You said something on social media which made me absolutely sort of clap my hands and in agreement. And it was it was a back and forth that we were having about Oh, I think it was about the use of skeptics
Oh
in
yeah, yeah,
films and how skeptics are always used as a sort of straw man figure, or you know, Ghostbusters, the guy who
yeah.
Walter Peck who turns up to turn the thing off. And you had said about trying to write something in which, you know, the skeptic wins in a sort of supernatural situation. The skeptic is right. Um, and then you said something. You said, but the story wouldn't let me, you know. And I just thought that tunes so perfectly with my experience of creative writing, that I will write something, and even at the end of writing it, I remember pitching a script which is actually, you know, going quite far in the development hell that everything exists in. Um, and saying to the director, you do know it's quite a misogynistic script, this. And they were like, what do you mean? No, of course it is. It's about a strong young woman, but blah blah blah. And I said, yeah, but she's being punished for being independent and for all the decisions she makes go wrong. And yeah. And he was like, is it? You know, is
Yeah,
it really? I was saying, yeah, but you know, that's just where the story goes. It's if I was trying to
yeah,
course
yeah,
correct
yeah,
it, it wouldn't
yeah. It's
work, you
funny
know.
that, isn't it? Yeah,
It
absolutely.
just has to go where it goes. The story sort of, I unleash it and I have the lead, but it's taking
I
me where
find one
it'll
of the
go.
most pleasurable things about writing is when you're really immersed in the story and something pops up. Not necessarily you might be working on a street or on a scene, say, and something. Usually when you're on the borderline of being tired, to be honest, and then something pops
Mm.
up, but it's not that scene, but it's something about something else. It might be a line of dialogue or something else, and I remember it happening, a film that was talking of development hell. It's been in development hell for, I think, about 30 years off and on with, I think, 5 or 6 different directors. But that last scene that came from the unconscious, I remember writing it down on a bit of paper. I hadn't got to that scene yet. And that's never changed in that whole 30 years. And
Mm.
it's weird that the one scene that came out of non-conscious thought in a way, it has not been touched. So it's kind of touched people along the way in a sense that it's stayed there. And yeah, when the other thing I remember is when I was working on a series called Afterlife, ITV TV series, and I kind of dreamt the last scene. So that was a real pain in the ass because I had a really vivid dream that it was a house somewhere, and my main character, Alison, who's a spirit medium, was carried out of this house by a giant of a man with a mask on his face, and she's laid down on the floor under a railway bridge, and the train goes over the railway bridge, and she's lying there dead. And I thought, right, okay, that's the last scene. But how the hell do I get to this last scene? And I knew that had to be the last scene. I just had it so vividly in my mind, and I had to kind of unpick every bit about it to make it logical. Because I was
Oh,
so
that's
convinced it
wonderful,
had to
though.
be, because it was kind of a vision, I suppose. I suppose you would call it a vision in a sense.
But I love it when you've written a story, and this is what I love about redrafting. When you've written a story and you know where it's going, you know what the end is, and you're fairly confident of all that sort of stuff, and then you can sort of go back and drop
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah,
things
yeah.
in to make you look really clever. That's how did he think of all those things? Because I think your audience always has this illusion, no matter how much they intellectually know, that you can redraft. Or it's a similar when you go to the theater, you know, as a intellectually, rationally, the actors have learned their lines, they've done this 5 times already, you know. But if you went to see a play and you were greatly moved by it, and then you went back to the same theater the next night and saw them do it again, I bet you'd feel betrayed, because I bet there's a bit of you that would think, I thought you were just
Mm,
spontaneously doing that.
yeah,
Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that any artistic performance has that as
Do you
a
remember
as a
there
sort
was
of
well, there still is.
grounding illusion.
I think he's Canadian comedian or American. Dennis Leary. Did you ever come across him?
Oh
And we
yeah, yeah, I
saw
remember him.
we
He was
saw
like Bill
yeah,
Hicks.
stand-up act that he did at Edinburgh Festival. I'm talking many years ago. And he was so good and incredibly impromptu. And we went to see it again with some friends, and it was exactly the same. I mean, it was it was uncanny, and I thought, how can that be possible? Because it was so improvised sounding, and yet it was all absolutely immaculately worked out. Really, really, really good.
Down to he's got a tight 10. He's got a,
Absolutely,
that's what they
absolutely,
call
yeah,
it.
yeah.
One of the things that we agreed upon as well, and I was there's nothing I like more than violent agreements.
Violent agreements, yeah, absolutely. That's a good one.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Was the Jonathan Glazer, who I think is one of those directors
Yeah,
who is in that legacy of British
completely. Yeah, yeah.
directors being a bit off the wall, being a bit, his film Birth, which of course was kind of lambasted and was a complete flop when it came out, and
No,
people
I don't
said it
care. I
was,
don't care
if
about
it was,
what other people think. No, increasingly, I don't. I don't. I just, if I'm taken by something, it's a water off a duck's back. Then, I'm completely,
yeah.
as obviously you are in that case.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things about sitting in festivals is you sit and you sometimes will be going, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, while people are booing
Oh my
around you.
God.
It's like, well, okay, obviously I'm on my own, but that's a
Yeah,
beautiful film.
yeah.
I don't care.
This is like, and not like anyone's gonna persuade me out of it. That's what I find quite bizarre when you get into people saying, "Oh yes, but," don't say yes, but, because I'm not going to change my mind. Because you
I love,
know what I'm like. I put on recommendations, meaning I think this film's worthwhile. It's not so that people can tell me it isn't, because I'm not going to. I'm not going to change my mind. I still got to think it's great. So don't waste your air, Um, but
yeah,
Birth, I thought
absolutely.
was absolutely not only immaculately made, which is a good start, but also just deeply on the level of being about something that was very just incredibly powerful. I thought.
Mm, mm. Because it is about, I mean, that is a film which is, I mean, it's become a bit of a cliche now, and I find it, I think I might have put a social media post about, can we have a horror film that's not
Yes,
about grief,
yeah,
please? Because it was like, it's really a metaphor about grief.
everything
Yes,
is.
yes, I
Yeah,
know, I get it. I mean, kind of everything is and
yeah,
everything isn't, and um but that really is about a sort of when grief becomes something else. It's and when love becomes, well, I mean, it's kind of lover's madness as well. It's you, even when you hear Nicole Kidman describe their love affair, oh, he asked me to marry him 30 days in 30 different churches, and it's like, that's
yeah, yeah.
weird. Though we had a wedding,
But the
so
great
that's
thing is two
gothic. That's
characters that both want something, and they kind of what they want clashes, but you feel for both of them. Yeah, I'm talking about the child,
mm,
without too much of
yeah,
spoilers,
absolutely.
but you know what I mean. You actually, I think that is potentially powerful kind of story or scene, really. I remember someone saying to me that that's the secret of a good scene is two characters who are completely at odds, but you kind of side equally with them, So I always thought
Mm,
that if you're, with a supernatural thing, when one believes what's happened and the other one doesn't, you've got to give them both a good argument so that the audience is thinking both ways, kind of thing. Um, and that's what creates a good scene, I think, a lot of the time. But when you've got the whole film based on a clash like that. I mean, also in Birth, it creates such a melancholy atmosphere, doesn't it? It's such a melancholy film, and it doesn't. I don't know whether people went thinking it's kind of a supernatural film, um,
mm,
but yeah, I suppose, as I said to you when we were talking about belief and skeptics and that kind of thing, if you've set up a kind of supernatural idea like reincarnation, and it turns out not to be the case, then what you replace it with has to be at least interesting as
mm.
reincarnation. It better be better than reincarnation as a dramatic idea, or you're stuffed. It's a disappointment, So that's always the trade-off, I think, when you've got those kind of ideas in play.
Yeah, yeah. I once heard it's a similar thing to that description you just made of a compelling scene. A definition of a tragedy is when everybody's
Oh God,
right.
that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, yeah, because they're obviously going to be in conflict. Even, you know, if somebody is right and somebody is wrong, that's kind of easy to
Yeah, yeah,
resolve. But when everybody's right, what are we
yeah,
going to
yeah.
do? You know,
The other one that
days.
I heard, which seems to fly in the face of a common belief, which is conflict is only useful in as far as it reveals character. And I thought that's pretty good because you can have loads of conflict.
Mm.
Soap operas are full of people shouting at each other about this and that and the other, but does it show you any, does it reveal any more about their character in these scenes? Often not, you know. And I thought that was worth bearing in mind, really.
Yeah, soap operas you can't really reveal
They got to,
character because
yeah,
they've got to sort of stay the same until they
yeah,
don't,
yeah.
you know. Until the story is what is going to change
So
them
what do you
rather
feel,
than
John,
and
about the duration of stories? Because I feel very strongly lately that stories that would have been, I mean, across film and TV, films are getting longer, and TV shows are getting longer. In other words, something that may have been a one-off film or a two-parter now has to be 6 hours, sometimes 8 hours. The same kind of stories now are being stretched. And very often, something that used to be, say, 3 hours gets stretched to 6 hours, and it can't withstand it. And there's a sag in the middle of the bridge. And what you find is because there's a sag, then they introduce something left field, like a time travel one, or we're going to have a bottle episode about a minor character or something like that. And it's creating a kind of disrupt, in a bad sense, a kind of disruption to, I think, the natural form of natural structure of drama. I think the commercial imperative of having longer series longer series. I should say
oh, abs
serials because my the old thing used to be series, which are one story per episode that kind of add up, and you can get away with a lot of things in that format. But now it's all serials with kind of novelistic storylines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I remember when it used to be, Kojak and
Yeah,
Starsky and Hutch with a new case, and to be continued was like met with
yeah,
howls of
absolutely.
disappointment. What do you mean you're not going to finish? You're going to come back next week. That's irritating. Um, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's at the moment there's an urge towards open-endedness because it's this idea of
Yeah,
franchise and maintaining things. And, something like Game of Thrones, I get the feeling George R. R. Martin didn't dream an ending and is writing towards that. I think those books meander by the second and third book. It's not like that's
do
a
you think
quality that's new
he's
to
not
them.
got
They've
any
all,
great desire to end it now? Do you think?
I think
Well, the
he's,
TV
I
show
think
ended,
he's
so
gone
what's the
past.
what's the point? Well,
Yeah, and I think everybody got. I think the TV show ended when Jon Snow died, and the minute he died and came back again, then it was just like, oh, what's the point? I'm not. I don't believe anything anymore. You've broken a very important rule of
yeah,
drama, and it's. I mean, you can get. I'm sure you can go into the whys and the wherefores, but I just ultimately think I feel like Kathy Bates in Misery. He didn't get off the cockle-doodle. He didn't jump out of the car. You're showing us the wrong bit
yeah,
in Rocket
yeah.
Man. You know, so I think those cheats are really I agree with you. They're damaging to the integrity of narrative. And coming back a little bit to connecting it to what you said about we need to have a low budget Frankenstein. I think that's a really good point. I was reading Richard Lester on Robin and Marion because this is part of the work I'm doing at the moment, and he said Robin and Marion was a $5 million film, and it should have been a $1 million film because it's basically shooting a guy under a tree. It's a guy sitting under a tree. What do you need $5 million for? I mean, it's a guy in a forest with a
Yeah,
sword. It's not. You maybe need one
yeah.
castle. Yeah, and and I just thought that's so true. There are so many films and series which are kind of spoiled by um an inflation that is matching the budgets that have been agreed upon, and maybe the status of the director, or
It's
the
funny because
you'll often hear a
it used to be the
director's.
other way around, didn't it? It used to be how can we trim this to fit a low budget? How can we make it less? The famous sketch from that I think it was that was the week that was with David Frost. I remember there was a sketch that said the BBC version of Zulu, which consisted of Roy Kinnear with his rifle going, "Look, there's Zulus, thousands of them." That was it.
Yeah. We
Yes.
don't pan or see anything, or yeah. Well, they could do Anna Karenina and War and Peace on the BBC with like
Yeah,
one
yeah.
set, and
Well, High
and just
Claudius
a
wasn't
couple of shadows and
Gladiator,
all.
was it?
Well, precisely, and all the better for it. I mean, you can see that this with sequels. I mean, that's a very good example, actually, where Gladiator 2, they feel has to be bigger, but Gladiator was, who watched Gladiator and thought not big enough? I mean, why don't they flood the Colosseum and
The
have
Sharks.
boats in it? Which I know is Yeah, I know it. I know there's an element of history to that, but it just looks
Yeah,
daft, and it's yeah, I think inflation. I think we need a little bit of more of, again, Lars von Trier and the idea of dogma. Why don't we sit down and write a set of limitations and see if we
yeah,
can work within those? I interviewed a comedy director called Michelangelo Covino, who's just done a brilliant film called Splitsville, a real cinematic comedy. And he said that he was very inspired by Italian comedies of the 60s and 70s. And he said one of the things was they didn't have much film, and they didn't have much budget, and they didn't have much time. So they were shooting fast, and they had to make their decision. And they'd often have only one or two takes at the most. And so their ideas were bold, and they were, and they stuck by them. And there was no one, because they were doing it fast, there wasn't really time for anyone to get in the way, you know.
it sounds a bit like the
And
old
that's why you
Laurel and
have
Hardy kind of silence that they'd shoot in 1 or 2 days, wasn't it? The 20-minute shorts.
absolutely,
How they did that, God knows, because they were
absolutely.
quite complicated.
But you get a trained team of people who all know each other, and you do it. But I mean, even if you look at sort of the Hammer films, you get that team of people working in a place, and uh, all committed to their craft, and
Yeah, yeah,
you create some great
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. It's funny because I don't really. This is interesting. I don't know what draws me back to the Hammer films. Is it
Mm.
the sense of that handcrafted group of people that you just feel kind of you connect to? Is it to do with, be interested to know what you think, John, about the age you are when you were exposed to certain sorts of films that kind of mesh with your natural sensibility, genre-wise, or what do you think? What was it for you? I think it's something that
I
happens
think
when
there's
you're 12, 13, 14, and you're getting to know yourself in terms of your taste and that kind of thing. And what's your opinion?
I definitely think there's an element as well that when you're that age, the word hammer, for me, was also mixed up with the Hammer TV show, and so the films and everything, and it was almost synonymous with just a certain kind of costumed horror. So there were plenty of films which I thought were Hammer films, which had nothing
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
with Hammer. Like,
yeah,
later films like The Wicker Man, for instance, I would have thought, oh, that's a Hammer film because there's Christopher Lee, and there's, sort of
yeah,
sense of
yeah,
creepiness that I get out of that. And also the furniture. There's something about, like, that furniture that you see. I think Corman has this as well
yeah,
with his Poe movies.
yeah,
The minute you see that furniture, and those colors, you sort of, everything's
yes,
slightly
yeah.
velvety. People pull ropes to ring bells, and I'm open fires crack,
I'm
and I
convinced
just
that
want
one of the
to
reasons I
be
wanted to buy
there.
this house that I'm in at the moment. Um, was that there are stone steps down to the cellar, and they're actually worn down the middle.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
just couldn't stop thinking of the pit and the pendulum and those steps that go down to the pit and the pendulum.
Do you hold a lantern
So
up
there's
as
only
you
about five, there's only
yeah.
about 10 steps, unfortunately, it's not quite far enough to have a candelabrum. I would like
Oh,
to, but
brilliant.
I think I suppose those kind of things become kind of subconscious, don't they, really? Um,
Mm,
but I'm just intrigued as to why things become, I suppose, part of your identity culturally at a certain age, and you know, form you as a creative person in a sense. And I think it's best to acknowledge it and absorb it rather than reject it. I mean, the last thing you want to do is kind of reject those kind of things because of some kind of intellectual pomposity or you know, I
no,
think there
no.
was a time when I thought, oh, horror film surely is not a job for a serious person. And then I thought, to hell with it. It's what the thing is to, I've always thought the thing is to do it well, really. That I think possibly the same as I imagine someone like Nigel Neal attitude would be,
Mm.
yes, I'll write this kind of story because it appeals to me, but I'll try and do it as damn well as I possibly can. Um, but yeah.
Absolutely. I remember going to a party once, and this was while I was doing my PhD, and I was interrogated by this quite sort of aggressive person who was older lady, and she was sort of saying, "Why is my tax? Tell me what you're doing. Why is my tax money paying for you to do what we're doing?" This was
Mm.
back in the day when you got student grants, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm doing Shelley and laughter," and it's like, "Well, what's that? What use is
Oh
that to
God.
anybody?" And I was just like, and I was kind of like the Nabokov line. Well, I'm not pursuing intentional murder, so
That's
that's my
that's a good one.
justification.
I'll
I
have
mean,
to remember that. That's a good one.
yeah, and I just think there was a friend of mine who Stephen Dalton, who's a film reviewer for Film Verdict and writes for the NME about music, and he's just got an ongoing joke that whenever we talk about if a film is good or bad or whatever, he'll just say it's just all made up. They just
It's
made it
all
all up.
let's
It's
just get
just all
back to all
made
this made
up.
up shit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea that anybody is saying this made up shit is really good, whereas this made up shit is really not good. I mean, it's just all it's am I supposed to take it more seriously for
But how do
what reason?
you you're I take it you're still a fan of horror, aren't you? Are you still a fan of horror?
Oh, massively.
So
Yeah, yeah,
how
yeah,
do you
massively,
how
massively.
do you react when someone says kind of looks down their nose as they inevitably do and says, why would you want to watch these things that upset people? Why would you want to watch such upsetting things?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one thing I do understand about people who don't like horror is that it is one of, along with pornography, it is the film genre that produces a visceral reaction. And if you don't like that visceral reaction, or if your tolerance for certain imagery is then I've no
Yeah,
argument with you.
absolutely.
You
I
don't
agree.
you don't
I
have
agree.
to have that. You don't have to have
Yeah.
that in your head. Full. I mean, I feel a little bit about Lucio Fulci films in that way, that that sometimes they're just too far for me, and I
I
can't
feel the same about
I
Richard
can't
Curtis
go.
films, but go on.
Yeah, well, yes, totally agreed. But now we're talking about torture porn in that case. um, utterly. Um, but in terms of as a genre at the moment, I think horror is absolutely knocking it out of the park. It's making some of the most interesting, significant films of the last few years. And in fact, it's got to the point where I think the complaints about horror not being taken seriously, such as Sinners not winning Best Picture or something like that, it's like, come on, there's no way Sinners didn't win Best Picture because it was a horror film, and it's not. It's to tell you the truth, I think the genre that is least well served by cinema at the moment is comedy. I think that horror is very well served by. I think if you go in with a comedy script and you go in with a horror script, the horror script is going to win every single time.
Don't you feel? I feel, or I felt for a while actually. You must know the quote by J.G. Ballard where he said, words to the effect, "Science fiction is the only sensible, creative reaction to the present world," or something along those lines. And I kind of feel the same about horror. I mean, how can you write and react to what's happening in the world without it being, to some extent, horror? That's what I feel. I wouldn't say it as justification for me writing horror. But sometimes you feel you need to have something because the word horror is so toxic to some people. Even though it's a successful genre, more successful possibly now than it's ever been actually. But the word is still such low rent intellectually and culturally that it still can be an embarrassment unless you're with fellow aficionados and you can just not worry about that argument and just spend your time admiring the films that you admire, etc. But yeah,
I wonder if it maybe is connected to the visceral in the sense that it bypasses sometimes the intellect. I mean, it can do both at the same time. It's not an either or situation at all. But maybe because it is that, historically, even when Mary Shelley was writing Frankenstein, Jane Austen was taking the piss with Northanger Abbey.
But you look at any book or any film in the genre of any note, it's always berated and disparaged by the press at the time. You go back and it'd be hard pressed to find one that wasn't really. I mean, Frankenstein was bad-mouthed. Dracula, I'm sure, was, and the classic films when they came out were outrageous, and the first Hammer films, which I mean are so mild now that you'd put them out in the afternoon and nobody would notice, really. But they were said to be so awfully bloody, and the blood, the redness of the blood was so upsetting to people.
The same is true of the Bond films. People would say, "Oh, the Bond films are so violent," and you watch them now and go, "Are they?" I mean, I can't really see it.
I suppose we've got the benefit now of having, over, well over 100 years of cinema. So a lot has happened in that time. A lot of changes. God,
this is true. Well, listen, Stephen, I've got one last question for you, which is the question I always ask our guests, at least when I remember. Sometimes I forget. Do you have a recommended film book for our listeners?
More TV, but it's called Life's Work. David Milch, writer of NYPD Blue and Deadwood, Hill Street Blues, and it's really all his about his life as a screenwriter, really. And found it really, really quite moving. What else have I got here? Chasing the Light, Oliver Stone. I know Oliver Stone is not someone that we now unequivocally admire, but the Chasing the Light is a good book. And
the audible version is really good.
Illusions by Ed Zwick. That's a good one.
A guest on the podcast.
So you had him already.
He came on. He came on when that first came out.
What else have I got here? Mad Men. Room to Dream. The David Lynch book, Room to Dream.
Oh, that's such a good
wonderful
book. Again,
I mean, it's one of the books that I could happily read again, like Kevin Brownlow's book about David Lean. That was an absolutely wonderful book. So that there's a few there. Sorry.
No, there is. No, that's great. If you want to read the David Lynch book again, I would recommend you listen to the audiobook because he does the
Oh,
audiobook
wonderful!
himself.
Yeah,
And the writer
yeah,
of the biographical
yes.
chapters reads those, and then he does his
Oh,
own.
brilliant! That'd be
And
great.
his voice is just
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
There are
I think
certain writers
that's where
who,
his real philosophy of really letting yourself go into dreams, into a dreamscape, and
mm,
I find that so much of work as a screenwriter is right brain activity. You know what I mean? That the idea of
mm,
just giving yourself over to whatever, you know, throwing a fish and catching a bigger fish, as he puts it, and all the rest of it, I think is the kind of artistic life that you wish for, really, and is so seldom the case when you're
yeah.
trying to do it for a living, to be perfectly honest. But there's something really inspiring about reading that book.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also recommend a documentary that was made about him, the
Mm.
art life, in which you just sort of see him
Yeah,
at work in his house, sort of hammering
make
away and
furniture,
pouring
do a
paints
painting,
and
write a script.
drinking
Yeah,
a coffee,
yeah.
smoking a fag. Super. Well, thank you so
Thanks,
much
John.
for
I really
joining me,
enjoyed it.
Stephen. It's been an amazing chat.
Okay,
Great to
great.
talk to you.
Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.